You're listening to Shoe In, covering the ins and outs of all things footwear, from sneakers to heels, loafers to slippers, and every type of shoe in between. Brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. And now your footwear insiders, Matt Priest and Andy Polk.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. Thanks for joining us. As always, we really appreciate your listenership to the Footwear Industries podcast. We bring on a number of executives, experts, thought leaders to really discuss how the industry is changing, morphing, transforming, dealing with COVID, coming out of COVID, hopefully soon. And all these ideas and thoughts are really focused on helping you think differently, think more clearly, enact changes at your businesses that help create efficiencies, create new products, engage with consumers. All those sorts of things is what we try to accomplish every single day on this show. I want to thank my colleague, Matt Priest and Jasmine Pendergrass, for joining us today. How are you guys doing?
Doing good.
Good, man. Doing well. Just living the dream in my mom's basement.
Well, it's some sort of dream, but maybe not the greatest dream. But it is a dream, I guess. So I know we've been doing a lot of content drops for the industry. Obviously, we have Kicks Over Coffee, our video channel. We have this podcast. We have a number of dedicated websites to issues in the footwear industry and departments that people may work in on fdra.org, constantly updating all that information and trying to send it out. And one of those ways we do it as well as webinars and also partnering with other leaders in the industry like Fanny, like 210 and like Footwear News. So Matt, why don't you tee it up for us? We've got a special episode today because you interviewed one of the industry's leaders, both on the brand side and retail side. So I'll tee it up for you and let you tell the listeners what we got today for them.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, Andy. So I had the opportunity to sit down with one Ed Rosenfeld, who's the chairman and CEO of Steve Madden. Ed and I were a part of the broader event put on by Footwear News in partnership with us and 210 and Fanny around the way forward, basically the industry coming together in a variety of different voices and perspectives, talking about the post-COVID era, the current COVID era, and what the industry needs to do to stick to it and to maintain our community, which is so strong in so many ways. And so Ed and I, on day 2, sat down to talk about a variety of different topics, from sourcing to supply chain to tariffs to politics, get out the vote, and Black Lives Matter. And so you name it, we covered it. And Ed was super gracious with his time and his honesty on the ways in which they are working through as a company each of these issues and the challenges of our time. And so with that, tee up, Adrian, our producer, please roll the tape.
Please welcome Matt Priest and Ed Rosenfeld.
Ed, thanks so much for joining us for this way forward conversation about all that's going on with the footwear industry. I'm really appreciative of you taking the time. You know, we have been battered with a number of crises for a number of years now. We've had China trade war. We've had just the overall move to e-commerce and the digitization of our supply chain. And now we're faced with COVID. There really doesn't seem to be any rest for the weary. And so my question for you at the outset is kind of how, in a general sense, are you approaching all these different crises? How do you kind of get up in the morning and put forward a strategy in your mind to handle each of these things as they come at us?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. It's my pleasure to be with you. You're right. The footwear news has not been for footwear business rather has not been for the faint of heart the last couple of years. We've certainly had a lot thrown at us, and look, I think you gotta live in the world as it is, not the world you wish it were. And so sometimes you just gotta get up, put one foot in front of the other. I think really the important thing right now is you have to be flexible, and you have to be have an open mind and be willing to change course and it's great to have a long-term plan, but this is the kind of the period where you got to rip a few pages out and put in new ones, and that's what we're doing.
Well, that's a good way to put it, because there seems to be a lot of ripping, a lot of crossing out, a lot of whiteout, if you will. And so I think we're all kind of faced that. But if you look at kind of retail right now, I never thought in my wildest dreams or nightmares that I would see in the FDRA weekly sales report 99% down in brick and mortar this week, this year versus same week last year in March and April. These are just unprecedented times. Are those numbers you ever thought you would see? And kind of how are you approaching COVID's current impact on retail as we move into more selling and possibility of more opening of stores?
Yeah, no, that's not something I ever thought I'd see either, and I certainly hope I never see it again. It was not a period we enjoyed. Look, as stores open up, we're obviously seeing some recovery there, but we're not out of this, obviously, and frankly, we were seeing some nice improvement in the stores that we had reopened, and then as the cases began rising across the country, we saw a little bit of a pullback again. So I think that until frankly there's a vaccine, this is something we're going to have to deal with, and there's going to be some steps forward and then some steps back, particularly in parts of the country where maybe the outbreak intensifies. So we have to be prepared for that.
Yeah, you talked about those kind of 2 steps forward, 1 step back phase. I think we were all at a point, I think in March and April, where we thought we might kind of see the worst of it, and then we'd have a summer of reopening and increased sales, and we haven't seen that. We've seen kind of the opposite of that. How is the retail experience in Steve Madden stores and brick and mortar in particular? How are you all altering that? Talk about face coverings. There's obviously this national debate on who should and shouldn't be wearing masks. How on earth do you navigate that at the head of a footwear company with a lot of retail space?
Sure. Well, yeah. Look, I think you have to start with the premise that job one is doing everything you can to protect the safety of both your employees and consumers, and so that's our starting point. We're doing all the things everybody else is doing. We're doing temperature checks for our employees. We're limiting the occupancy in the store. We've got contactless payments. We've got all sorts of social distancing measures. We are obviously all of our employees are wearing masks, of course, and we do have signage that indicates that the customers should be wearing masks as well. And if they come in without one, we provide them one. Fortunately, we haven't had any confrontations yet. So we'll hope that continues. But look, it definitely makes it more challenging, and it's more challenging for our store associates. We're asking a lot of them right now because they're trying to do all the things that they normally do, and also clean and disinfect every 2 hours. And there's a whole protocol with any shoe that's returned and tried on that has to go into quarantine. So it's definitely challenging.
Yeah, it is challenging. And I think we're in this really strange environment as well, where from an economic perspective, we have a lot of cash that's been dumped into the economy here in the United States. We're running up against the kind of the end of that, and Congress is deciding what to do next. But one of the things I've always been blown away by, and I don't know if you see this in your business or not, but how tax refunds and how direct injection of cash into consumers' pockets dramatically impacts demand and the purchasing of shoes. And so my question for you is, as you think about the potential for additional stimulus or ensuring the economy keeps going, how important is it to ensure that disposable income is flowing into the pockets of those who've been impacted this financially?
Yeah, look, we're certainly hopeful that there's additional stimulus coming from the government. Obviously the economy is contracted at basically with unprecedented speed and scope here. And, though unemployment came down a little bit, we're still at double-digit unemployment, I think 11% last month. So we certainly hope that there's an extension of these expanded unemployment benefits in some form. Another stimulus payment would be great. I think you hit the nail on the head. We definitely saw those $1,200 checks that went out. We saw that a direct impact on our business. At the time, it was mostly online. But we're certainly hopeful that there's more stimulus here because we think it's needed.
Yeah, we couldn't agree with you more. Let's talk online. Just mention online. So e-commerce was way up on our weekly sales survey. We were up 165%, on average over the life of those months or those weeks and months where we were closed down from a retail perspective. That's not enough to make up for the lost sales of brick and mortar. But talk to us about the Steve Madden business. What did you see online? And then, from there, are we going to go back to an environment where we don't see that kind of growth on online as well? So where are you kind of sitting right now as it relates to e-commerce?
Yeah, that definitely has been the bright spot. We've been thrilled with the performance across our e-commerce businesses, but particularly on SteveMadden.com. It was a business that was already on a very nice upward trajectory for us. So last year, 2019, SteveMadden.com was up about 60% in revenue and much more than that in profit. But we've seen a nice further acceleration from there, certainly since the onset of the COVID-19 crisis. Actually, the first couple of weeks were soft. Even online, I think consumers were just pulling back on fashion in general and buying, toilet paper, I guess. But
Right.
really, since the beginning of April, we've seen the business pick up dramatically. I think when we were on our last earnings call, we were up 75%, and the business has actually strengthened even further since then. And even as stores have opened up, we have not seen any slowdown in e-commerce. So, we do think that a lot of these habits that, in terms of consumer behavior, shopping more online, are going to be sticky. And I think there's going to be really, another sort of step function increase in overall e-commerce penetration, even when we come out of the crisis.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I like that word, sticky. Now, are some of your brands stickier than others, if you will, to use the phrase? Are they doing better as it relates to e-commerce in your staple of Steve Madden brands?
I think all of them are seeing growth. I would say Steve Madden itself is doing the best. We're also seeing really strong growth out of Dolce Vita, but a smaller business. But really, there are categories that are doing much better than others. So, for instance, in the Steve Madden business, it won't surprise you that the casual products and flat sandals are doing much better than, say, dress shoes.
Right. That makes sense. So, and in my mind, as we kind of continue to think about the way forward as an industry, we have socialized, I think, e-commerce purchasing for maybe a generation of buyers that were not socialized to it. I'm thinking baby boomers and above. And it sounds like you guys are hopeful that those buying habits will stick for those who had not used e-commerce before the crisis set in.
Yeah, I think that's very likely. It's interesting, but a lot of people attribute the rise of Tmall in China and really e-commerce overall in China to SARS.
Right.
And the impact that had, I think it was back in 2003. So I think it's quite likely that it has a similar impact here.
Okay, that's good. That's good news. I always like to hold on to good news during these times. Let's talk about sacred cows, right? So there's so many things within our respective businesses, operationally, design-wise, product-wise, that just kind of live on in perpetuity until something happens where you reassess them and critically think about them. Is this a time to be right-sizing? Or you can use a number of different ways to describe it. Is this the right time to be looking with a critical eye at those things that should have died a long time ago, but because of different corporate cultures and the like have lived on just because they do?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think in a time like this, you certainly have to take a step back and look at everything. And we've been doing that. And I think we've concluded that there are some things in our business that may have made sense in the past, but no longer make sense today. A lot of those are, when you come to those conclusions, so they're tough decisions. We are in the process of closing down one of our office locations and consolidating it into the rest of the business. And while I feel very confident it's the right business decision, it's painful because there are people that are losing their jobs and it affects their livelihoods, and it's something we obviously never take lightly.
Yeah, of course. But at the same time, I guess has been coined to Rahm Emanuel, you never let a good crisis go to waste. And I think that this is, and it's not just at the professional level. I think we're all going through these things personally as well, but looking at what really matters to the business, what really matters to the overall health and success long term, and taking this opportunity to assess those things and then carry them on, enhance them, or put them down if they need to be put down.
Absolutely. And for sure there will be good things that come out of that process. And we're committed to doing it.
Okay, well, let's move to something that Steve in particular and the Steve Madden brand is really well known for, and that's the test and react concept, right? Putting product in certain brick and mortar outlets, particularly in New York, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, if I get any of this wrong, but taking product, putting it in certain retail locations, seeing if it sells, and if it catches on, having the agility to move and push that product more broadly across your different retail channels. How on earth are you still doing that? And then how do you kind of transition that to digital? And is that something you guys have taken a look at?
Yeah, it's a great question. And you're absolutely right that test and react strategy has been really a critical part of our success for almost since the company's inception. And it's a process that we've continued to, tweak and modify and hopefully refine and make better over time. And over the last several years, we've really incorporated more testing online. As you articulated, it really started testing products in limited quantities in our retail stores and looking at the winners and then taking those into the wholesale channel. But over the last few years, we've been doing more testing on stevemadden.com in particular. And one of the nice things about that is we can put products up for pre-order before we even have any production and start to get a read. So we can almost learn about things even a couple weeks earlier. But that's obviously a process that since COVID-19 hit, we've really leaned into the testing that we do online, and it's been very successful. We've been able to get reads on products even when there was almost no store business happening.
Yeah, I think that's what people don't realize is the nature in which our companies need to be really agile. And so when you have something like COVID or some of these other things that have impacted our business take hold, building that agility in, and that particularly in the back end, is really important so that you can push product to people as the dynamic changes. And I think nothing has challenged our ability to be more agile than, at least before COVID, other than the China trade war. So let's talk about that, because that is something that has hit the Steve Madden business in particular and across a variety of different product categories, something that you were very active and engaged in, having testified before the U.S. government last June in 2019 about the negative impact of the tariffs. So from a broader perspective, and we can talk more kind of the details in a minute, but from a broader perspective, how do tariffs impact the way in which you guys can be more competitive, more agile, and more responsive to the American consumer?
Yeah, well, look, they're tough, and we didn't like them before COVID-19, and we really don't like them now because as you know better than anybody, our industry is already burdened with very high duties, and so we really don't have any choice but to raise prices to consumers with these additional tariffs, and that's something you worry about in any environment, and what that impact is going to be on consumer demand. But particularly now that we're in a situation where the economy is contracting and we have double-digit employment, and we know consumers are going to be very focused on value, these tariffs are we certainly they're not helpful. Let's put it that way.
Right. Right.
So we're counting on you, of course, to get these rolled back.
I'm up for the challenge, Ed.
But generally speaking, you asked about the impact. I mean, look, we have to obviously continue to diversify our sourcing outside of China, but there are all sorts of challenges with that because there are very good reasons to be in China. And you know them very well, but it's not just price, but it's quality and it's speed and it's the whole infrastructure and all the material suppliers and everything else that makes it a good place to produce footwear at a great value.
Now, clearly, since the trade war has taken effect and we have this phase one agreement that's currently being held together with, I think, bubble gum and duct tape, the rhetoric has gotten even more challenging between the U.S. government and the Chinese government on a slew of issues, and we're not going to go through them tick by tick. But I want to talk to you more about how do you measure and how do you kind of track this rhetoric and the impact that it has on the overall business, because this isn't just about American footwear retail. It's all about global retail. It's about meeting the demands of a rising consumer in places like China and elsewhere across Asia. So how do you at the helm of this, how do you kind of wrap your mind about all the different noise that's out there as it relates to the relationship with China? And then how do you take that noise and then make decisions on behalf of the business to be more successful?
Yeah, it's certainly concerning. The tensions just seem to escalate further every week, every day almost, and the rhetoric gets tougher on both sides. So it's something we're watching carefully. I think we already had tariffs, which were certainly encouraging us to diversify our sourcing, but given these heightened tensions, I think there's only more pressure to move quick on that front. But we really hope that it doesn't continue to go in this direction, not only because of our sourcing relationships, but because all of us brands, we want to sell stuff in China too, and eventually, that part of the business could be impacted also.
Does the China trade war, or the relationship with China, do you get feedback from your consumer base on these things? We often, anytime we're interviewed in the press about it, we often get emails and people kind of reaching out to us to provide their point of view as it relates to our relationship with China, usually in the negative. Are these things that your consumers are worried about, or are there other issues that are on top of their mind?
We really don't get feedback with respect to any kind of relationship with China from our consumer. I guess if you think about who our core consumer is, obviously younger consumers, very focused on fashion, maybe not so much on geopolitical considerations with respect to China.
Well, something I think everyone is focusing on, it may not be geopolitics for your consumer, but the election is at hand. Clearly, it's not breaking news that 2020 is an election year. And as we head toward the Labor Day holiday, and then as someone who's worked in the political world for quite some time, post Labor Day is kind of when everyone starts paying attention. How, as a corporation, have you prioritized civic engagement around voting and being an election year? And then talk to us about how you walk that politically. We know Steve has been out there and said things in the press, and we all kind of, as companies and organizations, we all understand that we serve kind of a diverse group of citizens. But at the same time, there are clear priorities and values that you all have as a corporation and as a community there, Steve Madden. What are your priorities heading into the election year, and how do you engage with your employees and with your broader consumers?
Yeah, so we are quite focused. We have an initiative at the company to really encourage and promote voting and participation in democracy, particularly by young people. And we actually have a partnership with Voto Latino. We actually started working with them back in the 2018 midterms, working with them and Lyft to get people to the polls. But we ramped up our efforts with them earlier this year. With a big partnership, and initially it was going to be focused on voter registration and in-person registration in our stores. But because of COVID-19, we've had to pivot, and I think we're going to do more digital and social. But again, with the idea of really registering voters and getting young people to participate. And we're excited about that. I think in terms of how we approach it as a company, I think you really hit the nail on the head, in that, look, we all have our own political views. Steve has his, I have mine. Generally speaking, we're not trying to push that agenda with the company or with the brand. We obviously want the company and the brand we want people with different political views from mine or Steve's to feel comfortable working at our company or shopping Steve Madden. That said, there are some values and principles that are non-negotiable. Right. So we absolutely will stand up and say on behalf of not only ourselves but the company, that Black Lives Matter. You know, for me, that's not a political statement. That's a statement affirming basic human rights and decency.
Right.
And those are the kind of principles that you know, we do, you know, feel comfortable being very straightforward about.
I'm glad you brought up Black Lives Matter, because we are clearly in this national conversation around diversity, and as an industry as well, you know, we have a number of initiatives focused on diversity. How do you prioritize kind of the different issues that are out there as a company? Because there's so many different movements and issues, and some rise to the top of importance, you know, based on an election year or based on a tragic event like the killing of George Floyd. So how do you prioritize those things and then put assets internally towards them to ensure that what you want to do as a company is accomplished in these areas that are important to you?
Yeah, so last year we set up a corporate social responsibility department, and also a CSR committee of the board, and that group is really, you know, charged with creating a framework for us to deal with all the various issues that are important to the company and to our employees and to our consumers. Diversity and inclusion has been at the top of that list from the beginning, and I think only gained more urgency after the killing of George Floyd and the protests and demonstrations that followed. So we're highly focused on it. You know, we certainly know that we have room to do better,
Sure.
but we're really committed to, you know, to doing that. And when we've got all sorts of initiatives, I won't bore you with them now, but
Right.
you know, we're pushing pretty hard there.
Yeah, and I've noticed the initiatives around the voter registration as well. You know, one of the reasons we launched shoevoter.com was to provide a one-stop shop for footwear employees to go put in their home address and then find out what the rules are for registration, for early or absentee voting. Because this year, I think the normal range is about 25% of folks vote via absentee ballot. That year is probably going to push 50. That number will push 50% this year because of COVID. And so we want to make sure that our workers within the footwear industry have the opportunity to go and access that information in a nonpartisan, apolitical way that allows them to be empowered and then go and have their voice heard in early November. So I think these are all really good initiatives, particularly in a year where there's a heightened alert of what the impact will be, both on, you know, on us professionally as well as personally as it relates to the election. Ed, as we kind of wrap up our discussion, one of the things that we again are focused on is the way forward. And sometimes you don't know where you're headed, and so it's hard to kind of track out what the way forward is. So it might be too early to know that in its full fruition, if you will. But from where you sit right now, summer 2020, how are you feeling about the way forward? What are, you know, 2 or 3 things that you have learned during this time that you will not discard once we get beyond this? And then just kind of what are some kind of words of advice as we head out and keep churning and trying to make and sell great shoes to people all over the world?
Sure. Well, yeah, I can tell you what we're focused on at C-Man. There's a couple themes I think that we're very focused on. One is not surprising, it's digital. We talked about the increase in e-commerce penetration and how important we think that's going to continue to be. And so we're highly focused on that and positioning ourselves for a business where e-commerce makes up a much bigger percentage of the overall pie. But the other thing we're thinking a lot about is value, and because, you know, the economy is in a more challenging place than it was, 6 months ago, and we've seen in past times of recession or high unemployment, et cetera, how important value becomes to the consumer, and value price channels, but also products that really, where consumers really see the great price value proposition. So we're thinking about that a lot. I think more broadly, in terms of the way forward, look, I think for all of us in the industry, I think that we just need to continue to sharpen our focus on the consumer and really listen to what consumers are telling us about what kind of products they want, about how they want to shop for them, and also about how they want companies like us to conduct ourselves in a socially responsible manner, with purpose and guided by values. And I think if we listen to consumers, and act accordingly, I think we'll be okay.
I think that's great advice, because we live in an era where if you don't know what the consumer thinks and says, you have your head in the sand, right? Because it's a noisy era, and it's an era for which consumers voice their opinions and are active and engaged. So I think listening to them, ensuring that you're bringing out all those voices and then responding accordingly is great advice. So Ed, thank you so much for joining us today to talk about these issues, to be a part of the conversation of what the way forward looks like for the footwear industry as a whole. And we wish you and Steve and the entire Steve Madden family all the success in the world as we continue to navigate this crisis. But with I think with the confidence that we will move forward and sell more shoes to more people all over the world. So thank you.
My pleasure, Matt. Thanks so much. I really enjoyed it.
All right, that was a fantastic conversation, Matt. Maybe tell me a few of the highlights to take away, just from your perspective, being able to interview Ed and talk to him about these issues.
Yeah, the opportunity to talk to Ed. Ed's super thoughtful. He clearly works at a company that has a dynamic and passionate designer in Steve Madden, and he just really balances out Steve in a lot of great ways. And to sit down with him and talk about the ways in which the company prioritizes social engagement and the decency around Black Lives Matter and saying that phrase, not being a political statement, but just one of human dignity, all the way to how do you get engaged politically? How do you engage your associates politically in an election year? And then, to top it all off, the giant buzzkill of the China trade war, and how the impact has been pretty negative on the Steve Madden business, as it has been on just about every other footwear company, and just the ways in which Ed himself was active in that process. So I'm super grateful for the opportunity to have sat down with Ed. He's one of our former chairmen, so I think people who have listened to this and have seen this video can understand why he was such an effective chairman for us over just a few years ago.
Awesome. Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. As always, please subscribe to our podcast. We're on Spotify. We're on iTunes. We're on everything that fills your ears with love. Not hate, with love. That's Shoe and Show. You can also, again, we have many other channels. If you love to watch our videos and see our beautiful faces, mainly Jasmine, not Matt's, you can visit kicksovercoffee.com and see those interviews on that channel. But as always, as we continue to navigate through these challenging times, please do reach out to FDRA if we can assist you in any way. We have a number of resources, products, services, consultancies to help the footwear industry. It's why 90% of the industry are footwear members. And Ed Rosenfeld, who Matt just interviewed, is actually our past chairman. So we have a very involved board, but would love to get you involved if you're not an FDRA member or haven't been plugged in lately. Please come back so we can give you help and services. As always, thanks for listening. If you have ideas on shows or topics that we should cover on these podcasts, if you have a guest idea or you yourself would like to be a guest, just drop us a line. Go to shoeandshow.com. On the bottom left, there's a voice note. You can actually click on that and leave us a recorded audio message that we will get and we will respond to. Or you can comment on any of our shows by the same channel. Beware, we may publish it and talk about you on the show. So with that, folks, thank you very much again for listening to the Shoe and Show. And until next time, on behalf of Jasmine and Matt, Shoein is out.
Shoein has been brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. For information about FDRA, visit fdra.org.